What if the stranger-than-friends man you know, the one who shut himself off from everyone after a big betrayal, was about to lose the only person who could break down the walls around his heart? There's a simple, don't go away request that can change lives and lead to a new start in this movie. Will he be able to build a future with his cook, or will his fear of the past get in the way? Read all the way through to find out how this love story and forgiveness ends. If you like these kinds of exciting stories, don't forget to follow and turn on alerts so you don't miss any new videos. Mateusz Jackson lived by himself in a big house in the woods close to Lake Tahoe. It was a new building made of glass and steel that stuck out in the woods. From the outside, the large windows let in a lot of light and showed off a clean and well-organized inside. But anyone who walked through the mansion's gates could see that its grandeur was just a cover for the fact that the people who lived there were lonely. The long hallways were quiet, and the cold, faraway works of art that lined the walls stood out against the bright scenery outside. Mateusz's office, a place of control and order, was in the middle of the house. Most of his days were spent there, working on the things that had made him one of the richest and most successful tech business owners. At 45 years old, he had made a fortune making digital security software. But even though he lived in comfort and had a lot of power, his world was mostly made up of contracts, numbers, and security rules, which made him less and less interested in people. A painful event in the past caused this coldness to grow. Mateusz used to be more open and trustworthy. It changed everything, though, when there was betrayal and lying in the relationship. Someone who he had put his hopes and feelings in had failed him, which left him with deep wounds. Since then, he has walled himself off in a cage of indifference and self-defense out of fear of being open to being hurt. He hid behind being alone, and the house in the mountains became his safe place. On top of the hill, away from the city and any real people, he stuck to his strict routine, choosing quiet over the chaos of his feelings. The few people who worked at the house were told to follow strict rules. They weren't allowed to talk to him or get in the way of his routine at all times. Mateusz thought that by staying away from this person, he would be safe from the pain that life had already given him. He thought that the only way to avoid more losses was to be in charge. But when a new person moved into the house, everything was about to change. For Mateusz, the day began like any other. Like always, he woke up at exactly 6 in the morning. He took a cold shower, put on his neat white shirt, and went to the dining room, where breakfast was already ready for him. But as he walked down the hall, he noticed something strange. There was a different smell in the air. That coffee and toast smell wasn't there. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it felt sweet and familiar. Mateusz frowned because this small change in his routine made him mad. When he walked into the dining room, he looked at the table and saw a plate of pancakes with fresh fruit set in a beautiful way. He was annoyed just by seeing that bright, tempting plate. He looked around to figure out what was going on until he saw a person he didn't know. The young woman standing next to the kitchen door was calm and her eyes were sparkling. A controlled smile came from her, and she introduced herself. "Hi, Mr. Jackson. I'm Natalie Smith, and I'm the new cook. I hope your food is good." Natalie was very friendly and relaxed, which was very different from how cold the house felt. After the previous cook suddenly quit because she was sick of Mateusz's requests and the overwhelming silence in the house, she had to come. Natalie didn't seem to care about the businessman's fame or the strict rules he set, unlike her peers. Mateusz didn't do anything. His first response was anger at being asked to change his routine without warning. He didn't answer Natalie's question about who she was. He just sat down at the table and started to eat without saying anything. The young cook, on the other hand, wasn't upset. She kept looking at him for a moment longer before going to the kitchen. There was something odd about Natalie being there. Mateusz couldn't deny that breakfast felt different from the rest. It had a care that he wasn't used to feeling, but he quickly pushed the thought away. There was no time to make any changes right now. He made his rules clear, and Natalie had to follow them. From the outside, the next few days went by without any big events. Mateusz did what he always did. He always got up, worked, ate, and went to sleep at the same times. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something different in the air. The smell of the food in the kitchen was stronger and more varied, making him think of feelings and memories he didn't want to think about. Mateusz and Natalie would sometimes run into each other at dinner. She quietly watched him and didn't say anything. She seemed calm, which worried him. It was like she was studying him, trying to figure out what was really cold about him. He made it a point to not pay attention to her. She didn't seem to be there. He saw Natalie as an employee who should only do her job and not get interested in anything else. When they got together at the table, Natalie brought something different, a simple but fragrant home-cooked soup. When Mateus smelled it, he frowned and looked right at the cook. Natalie stayed calm while she waited for him to respond. He took the spoon and sipped the soup. His whole body was tense, but not tense enough. The soup was really tasty. Something about it made Mateus think of a vague memory and gave him a vague sense of warmth. There was a moment when he almost let down his guard, but his mind quickly took back charge and told him to hold back any feelings. His mouth was still full as he continued to eat. Natalie knew he was not saying anything, so she left the room, happy that she had done what she needed to do. The fact that Mateus didn't care didn't bother her. She knew, on the other hand, that it would be hard to get to this man. He kept his guard up, but Natalie was set on doing her job with the same care and determination. Mateus still wouldn't see her, but she was already changing the mood in the house. Mateus had a hard time keeping his routine the same after Natalie came home. Getting up before the sun, he looked great and went to his office. That room, with its dark walls, shelves full of scientific books, and big wooden desk, was his safe place away from everything else. Bills and contracts piled up on his computer screen, needing his full attention. He didn't notice the hours going by because he was so focused on numbers and research that he couldn't feel anything. He was determined to stay in charge, but he couldn't help but notice the little changes in his routine. Natalie's meals always had a surprise element, like a mix of tastes or a special touch that made him remember feelings he had forgotten. The routine of eating was no longer enough for Mateus. He now had to wait, albeit reluctantly, for Natalie to make the next meal. But he fought these feelings in his mind. He was constantly reminded of why he had put up his walls, the betrayal that had made him wary of any act of kindness. Because of this, he continued to stay away from Natalie. When he saw her in the hallways, he looked straight ahead and didn't pay attention to her, as if she were a ghost. The other people who worked at the house were used to Mateus being cold, but they could tell something was off. The house smelled different and felt like it was moving. Matthews wasn't willing to accept it, but Natalie was starting to have an effect on him. His life, which used to be pretty clear, was now full of little shocks. He tried to fight the changes, but they were just getting started. Natalie's first days at the house were filled with watching and getting used to her new surroundings. There was a heavy feeling in the air, the walls were cold, and there was a nearly suffocating silence in every room. She wasn't scared, though. In the kitchen, she found a place to be herself. The kitchen was a great place to show off your style because it had modern appliances and marble countertops. Natalie then began to add personal touches, like fresh flowers in small pots by the windows, a picture of her mother's recipes on the wall, and carefully placed shelves of fresh food. Once just a place to do things, the space turned into a cozy haven that matched the lightness she brought to her actions and stance. Every food she made had a story behind it, as if the taste could tell you something about who she was. Natalie slowly came to understand that the kitchen was more than just a place to work. It was the heart of the house because she put so much energy into every meal. And this new life was making its way into the hallways, which changed the mood of the house. But Mateus didn't know anything about it. He wouldn't admit that he had changed or that, deep down, he was looking forward to the next meal Natalie would make with some interest. He didn't say anything about the small changes that had happened in the kitchen, the smell coming from the oven, or how he felt when he walked into the dining room. But Natalie did know. She saw him quickly look at her as he served himself, and she noticed how quiet it was after each bite. That was a sign for her. There was a sign that there was a gap in Mateus' walls that she could use to get in. She wasn't in a hurry, though. Natalie knew that being in that house wasn't just a way to get somewhere else. She felt like she was there for a bigger reason, and the change was already happening, even if it was slowly. Natalie thought about how easy the recipes her mother had taught her were as she made each new food. Even if the person who got the food didn't want to know, it was a way to show love and care. She knew Mateus had a certain taste, a polished taste that came from being rich. But she didn't try to impress him with fancy dishes. Instead, she chose something easier and more meaningful, food that made her feel good. She chose to make her own bread one day. She worked on the dough all morning, picking out fresh ingredients and waiting patiently for it to rise. Soon, the smell of baking bread filled the house and made its way to Mateusz's study and the hallways. He made a face as he breathed in the smell. It was a smell that was so familiar but so far away in his mind that it really upset him. Something from his past that he had buried was trying to come back to him. When he sat down to dinner that afternoon, there was newly baked bread, a bowl of stewed soup, and whipped butter on the table. He thought about it for a moment and looked at the bread as if it were something from the past. Natalie stood back and looked at him with her normal calm face, waiting to see what he would do. After cutting a piece, Mateusz put it to his mouth to enjoy the smooth taste and soft texture. For a short time, he was in a cozy kitchen next to a happy woman who was offering him a piece of fresh bread. A wave of nostalgia hit him. It was his mom. The memory went away just as quickly as it came back. He closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. Natalie saw that his hand was slightly shaking as he put the knife down on the table. There was no thanks or anything. Even though Mateusz kept eating in quiet, she could tell that something inside him had moved, even if she couldn't tell what it was. She was able to reach parts of his heart that he thought were dead and hidden through small acts and carefully planned meals. After finishing her work in the kitchen, Natalie started going for walks in the grounds of the house every day after that. Beautiful, full of life and color, the outside was a stark contrast to the cold inside of the house. She met the handyman, Ethan, on these walks. Ethan was a young man with a free spirit and bright eyes that showed he loved nature. He took care of the grounds of the house with almost religious devotion. Natalie quickly became close with him and felt safe enough to talk about her fears and thoughts. "Do you think Mr. Jackson is always this way?" One afternoon, as she watched Ethan trim a rose bush, she asked. "He's been quiet ever since I started working here," Ethan said, pausing his work for a moment. "But you know, I think he cares about you somewhere. There is a lot of stuff covering it up." Natalie gave a serious nod. She had seen little clues in Mateusz's movements, the breaks he took during meals, and the sneaky looks he gave her when he didn't think she was looking. He kept some space between them as a way to protect himself, but she felt like she was making him notice her in some way. "Do you believe he can change?" she asked. Ethan smiled a broad, friendly smile. "I believe we can all change. We just need a good enough reason." Natalie thought about what was said as she walked through the yard. Mateusz watched them talk from a window in his office, far away. He was both annoyed and interested, but he didn't know why Natalie's presence made him feel so strongly. Maybe it was the way she lived her life without worrying about anything, which was very different from the armor he had worn over the years. Natalie and Ethan's bond grew stronger as the days went by. When they got together in the grounds, they talked about everything, including Ethan's hopes of moving to the city, Natalie's plans to open her own cafe, and Mateusz's strange behavior. When Ethan was taking care of a flower bed and his hands got dirty, he said, "He hides. I believe Mr. Jackson hides behind his routine and work because it's easier for him to do that than to face what's going on inside." Natalie sat down on a bench nearby and looked around at the blooming bushes. What Ethan said made sense. Mateusz was more than just a grumpy person. Something else was going on. He tried to hide his pain. She felt it every time she saw him or ate something he made for her. He seemed to have made a wall around himself and secretly wished that someone would be brave enough to break through it. Natalie told him, "I get how he feels. I'm scared to take chances too. I'm still here because I want to raise money for my dream. The thought of opening my own cafe scares me, but I need to do it." Ethan gave her a close look and smiled, which made her feel better. "You believe that being here is only about money?" he asked in a soft voice. Natasha was shocked by the question. That's something she had never thought of before. At first, the job at the house was just a way for her to get money for her dream. But as time went on, she realized that another reason she was there was to help Mateusz find a way out of the darkness he was in. "Perhaps it's not just about money," she said after some thought. "Maybe I need to find out how I can help." Ethan said, yes. He was aware that she was starting to figure out why he was in that house. Natalie was in the grounds while Mateusz stayed in his office, and tried to ignore the growing trouble inside him. He heard what Natalie and Ethan were saying, and even though he tried hard not to care, something in his chest kept pulling at him. Feeling envious? Feeling jealous? He wasn't sure. He did know that his life had changed forever when Natalie came into it. On one of those afternoons when they were by themselves, the memories started to come back. For a moment, he put down his work and stared out the window. His mind went back to a time he had hidden away in a drawer. Mateus thought about the woman he had loved and trusted deeply, but who had broken his trust and made him swear he would never be weak again. He thought that putting up walls around his feelings was the best way to protect himself at the time. But now that Natalie was there, those walls were being called into question. He remembers times when he was truly happy and laughing with other people, feelings he hadn't had in years. Natalie's small actions and almost ghostly presence seemed to connect us to these memories. That made him very angry. He didn't want to feel this way. He didn't want to weaken himself. But there was also a part of him that missed something else, something he had buried with the past. Natalie's soft, steady voice kept playing in his head, like a tune he couldn't block out. He had to decide whether to stay hidden in his fortress or face the ghosts of his own heart. Nicole had a great idea when she woke up that morning. She chose to make Mateus a special dish for dinner, something that would break up his boring pattern even more. A recipe for chicken risotto with veggies, a meal she loved as a child, was what she had in mind. It was simple, but symbolic. She spent the whole day in the kitchen, picking out the items with great care. She wanted everything to be just right. Natalie knew she was feeling a different part of the environment as soon as the smell spread through the house. It smelled bad to Mateus in his office, and he felt bad all over. There was something about the smell that made him think of an old memory that he didn't want to look into further. When Mateus went into the dining room in the evening, his plate was carefully set before him. He looked at the risotto with anger and doubt at the same time. He had the feeling that Natalie was trying to make him feel something he didn't want to. Like always, though, he sat at the table alone, took out his fork and spoon, and started to eat. It was a surprise when I tried the dish for the first time. Mateus stopped for a second because he was feeling a wave of emotions he couldn't put his finger on. He was taken back to a time when he still believed in the goodness of people and real relationships through the taste of the creamy rice, the feel of the veggies, and the mild spice. He remembered that his mother made a dish like this when he was a child, and it hit him with a heavy blow. When Mateus closed his eyes for a moment, he fought the urge to let that feeling of longing take over him. He stiffly opened his eyes and went back to eating like nothing had happened. Natalie stood far away and watched the scene. She noticed that his hands were shaking a little as he held the glasses. She knew something had changed in him, even though he wouldn't say it. Mateus felt something in the rice that he thought he had hidden for good. Mateus went straight to work after dinner. He needed to hide away to get back the control he felt was slipping away. He sat down at his desk, turned on his computer, and stared at the screen. The words and numbers in the reports and contracts didn't make sense to him at that time. His thoughts were elsewhere, going over what had happened at dinner. Natalie's food made him feel uncomfortable because it brought back memories. It was like she had opened a door he had kept locked for years without his consent. The door to a past he could still connect with and trust. That made him think of his mother. She always had a smile on her face and cooked with love. She was not at all like the person he had turned into, bitter, stiff, and emotionally detached. But Natalie's simple dish had made him feel something. That scared him. It was clear to Mateus that the mental walls he had built up over the years were being tested. He tried to make sense of it by telling himself that the dish had nothing to do with it. He knew he was lying to himself, though. He was mad at that very moment. Anger at himself for letting himself feel bad, and anger at Natalie for making him feel things he would rather not think about. Mateus got up from his desk and walked around the office. His hands were shaking and his chest felt heavy. What did she do to him? What did she want to show? He stood in front of the window and looked out at the yard, which was dark. He had decided never to let that fragile part of himself bloom again when Natalie touched it. But he also felt a little hope, like a part of his heart wanted things to change. But Mateus wasn't ready to give up power just yet, so he didn't agree with that. Not now. Not yet. While Mateus was having trouble with his feelings, Natalie kept living her life at the house and always seemed calm. When she talked with Ethan in the yard, it was one of her favorite parts of the day. There was something healing about being there with someone so kind and understanding while being in nature. Natalie told Ethan, sometimes I wonder if being here is really helping me reach my goal. She said this as she looked at Ethan lovingly taking care of the flowers. Ethan smiled and took a moment to clean his hands. He looked at her with the earnestness that was typical of him. Why wouldn't I be? He asked. You're not just getting paid. You're also learning how to deal with different people and tough situations. That's also part of becoming an adult, right? Natalie thought about what she said. She had a simple goal when she took the job at the mansion, to save money so she could open her own cafe. But now she felt like her being there was for a bigger reason. She did more than cook. She wanted to make that house feel different and communicate with Mateus so he could understand that life is more than rules and being alone. Maybe you're right, she said, crossing her arms. But I don't know if I'm going in the right direction. It feels like I'm not making a difference some days. Ethan smiled again, and this time his eyes had a hopeful look in them. Yes, you are. Every day, I see it. Even though Mr. Jackson doesn't show it, he does feel it. Also, the fact that you're making him feel something is great. Do not give up now. At that moment, Natalie let out a sigh of relief. Ethan was good at seeing things in a new light. Yes, it's possible that she wasn't just after the money. Maybe she was there to help someone get back on track and, in the process, get back on track herself. The weather started to change that afternoon. There were dark clouds in the sky, which meant that a storm was coming. The mood inside the house seemed to mirror the chaos outside. Mateus was by himself in his study and looked out the window at the storm. He thought that the whirlwind outside was a reflection of what was going on inside. Suddenly, there was a rumble of thunder and a flash of lightning. After a few minutes, the power went out, leaving the house in complete darkness. Mateus got up and walked to the office door, angry. When he opened it, thin light from the windows lit up the hallway. He heard quick, light footsteps ahead of him as he walked down the hall. He went in the direction of the sound and stopped at the kitchen door. Natalie stood there with a lamp in her hand, setting the table with lights. Even though there was a storm and the power went out, she looked calm. It looks like we don't have any light, she said, not looking at Mateus. That's how it looks, he said, being more rude than he meant to be. His anger rose when he saw how calm she was. He was used to having control over everything, so this new situation made him feel uneasy. Natalie looked at him after she was done lighting the lights. There was a glow in her eyes from the light that made them look even calmer. Don't worry, Mr. Jackson. It's just a storm. Anyway, things will be fine again soon, she said with a small smile. Mateus made a face. It was her calmness that made him feel uneasy. What made her think that things were so easy? He had spent years building a fortress to protect himself from anything unexpected, so the ease with which Natalie dealt with doubt made him nervous. She made his heart beat faster, and it wasn't just because of the storm. It was because she was there. Natalie's ability to make people feel calm and happy was making him feel a lot of different things that he didn't know how to deal with. For the first time, he began to question whether he really wanted to keep the safe distance he had always set for himself. The morning after the storm, Natalie was just finished making breakfast when a letter showed up at the kitchen door. It was a letter from a well-known restaurant in the city that was looking to hire new cooks. Natalie opened the letter with hands that were shaking. She was worried and hopeful at the same time. Her heart beat fast as she read the first few lines. It was an offer of work. The offer was perfect for her because it gave her the chance to work in a well-known restaurant and learn and grow as a chef. It was also a step toward her dream of starting her own cafe. She read the words on the paper, but as she did, a wave of doubt came over her. Thoughts of the kitchen that had become her safe place made her chest feel tight. How could she just leave? Leave the house behind, Ethan, and Mateus? In reality, she had grown attached to that house and that life over the last few months. Even more than that, she felt like her job there wasn't done. In the way she knew was possible, she still hadn't been able to fully reach Mateus. Natalie kept a notebook since she was a teenager. She went to her bedroom with the letter still in her hands and opened it. She took a deep breath, sat on the edge of her bed, and started to write. She talked about her fears, her hopes, and the mixed emotions that were going through her mind. In the middle of those words, It seemed like she was trying to figure out what to do. Going will help me reach my goal, but I will have to give up something important to me. It's possible that I wasn't just put here to raise money. I might be here to help Mateus find what he's lost in some way. What if I fail, though? He tried to figure out what he really wanted by writing these words. She was aware that she needed to choose quickly, but she wasn't ready. Things were connected between her and that house and Mateus that she couldn't see. Putting the notebook back in the drawer, she looked out the window at the yard, where Ethan was taking care of the plants. She could see Mateus standing on the balcony and looking out at the horizon. Natalie needed more time to figure out what her heart really wanted, even though the choice was getting closer. Natalie went downstairs to the kitchen that night to find peace. The letter, folded, was in her pocket and weighed her down all the time. To cool herself down, she lit a light and started making a herbal tea. Because she was thinking about something else, she didn't see Mateus coming toward the kitchen door. "Are you still awake?" he asked as he leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. Natalie looked up in shock, but she didn't seem tense. She didn't say anything after watching him for a moment. She looked at the teapot on the stove and said, "I couldn't sleep." Mateus was quiet for a moment, because he was having trouble putting his thoughts into words. Something about his face made me think he was frustrated and confused, like he was also lost in thoughts he couldn't sort out. He started, unsure whether to go on. "Today I saw you with a letter. Is it really that important?" She looked at him, not sure if she should tell him. She never thought Mateus would be interested in anything in her life because he had always been a closed-off person. In the middle of the night, though, they were sharing a place and, in a way, a moment of being open. Natalie took the letter out of her hand and put it on the table, saying, "Yes, it's a job offer. An eatery in the city. It's a wonderful chance." Mateus could feel his chest getting tight. He felt something strong when he thought about Natalie leaving. As always, though, he tried to keep a calm face. "Are you willing to accept?" he asked, trying hard not to seem interested. Natalie just shrugged and looked at the ground for a moment before turning to look at him. "Not yet. I need to think about many things." The two of them were quiet, and you could almost feel the stress in the air. The light flame cast soft shadows on the kitchen walls as it lit them up. Mateus wanted to say something, or show how he felt, but he wasn't sure how. He did nothing but stand there and watch her while Natalie worked on the injection. They had never been closer than they were at that moment, and neither of them could explain what it was. Mateus was antsy that morning. It was impossible for him to forget what he had said to Natalie in the kitchen. Something inside him broke when he thought about her going. It was an old fear that he swore he would never feel again. This fear kept following him around all day, making it hard for him to concentrate. His desk was empty of papers, and the words on his computer didn't seem to mean anything. Then, out of the blue, he chose to leave the office and go into the living room, where Mrs. Margot was putting the bookshelves in order. Even though Mateus didn't talk to the maid very often, he felt forced to do so now. "Mrs. Margot, do you have a moment?" he asked, but his tone of voice was tense than he meant it to be. She put down what she was doing and looked at him, not expecting him to come up to her. Margot had known Mateus for a long time and could tell how he felt just by looking at him. She nodded and pointed to a sofa nearby. She then sat down in another one and turned around to face him. "Of course, Mr. Jackson. What are you thinking about?" In a relaxed voice that made him feel like he could talk to her. Mateus was quiet for a moment as he thought of what to say. He felt bad about himself as he stood there, asking for help like a lost child. He knew, though, that he had to talk about it in order to figure out what was going on. "It's about Natalie," he said slowly at first. "She's been given a job offer in the city, and I don't want her to leave." Mrs. Margot stood still and watched him. It was the first time her boss had said something so straight about Natalie. Something was wrong with his voice, a tone of pain that she rarely heard in him. "Okay, why does this bother you so much?" she asked, pushing him to keep going. There was a knot in Mateus' throat, so he closed his eyes for a moment. His thoughts went back to the time when he swore he would never get attached to anyone else. "Because things will be the same as they were before she left. And I don't know if I want that," he said, struggling to get the words out. Margot kept her eyes fixed on his because she knew how much those words had hurt her. "Mr. Jackson, Sometimes we're afraid of losing things we never thought we could have, she said in a soft voice. Maybe the question isn't should she stay or go, but what you're willing to do to keep her. Natalie and Ethan walked through the grounds after work, as they always did, while Mateus thought about what Mrs. Margot said. It was a clear day, and there was a light breeze that made the flowers move. Natalie felt like she had a problem that she still didn't know how to fix. Are you going to take the restaurant's offer? Ethan broke the quiet by asking as he looked at a bed of flowers. Natalie sighed and stopped next to a figure made of stone to look out at the horizon. The yard was healthy, which was different from how she felt inside. She told him, I don't know. This is a great chance. It's exactly what I've always wanted. Still, something tells me that this isn't the end of my journey. Ethan nodded, realizing that she was confused. You know, I had a moment like that too. I had other hopes and plans before I started working at the house. But I learned that you need to be in a certain place to learn or change something about yourself. Natalie looked at him and was shocked by how deep his words were. You think that's why I'm here? To make a change? She asked, her voice full of both hope and fear. Ethan gave a smile and a shrug. I'm not qualified to answer that, but I can see how you've changed things around here, especially with Mr. Jackson. He is not the same as before, even though he doesn't understand it. It's your choice if you want to leave. But maybe sticking means losing more than just a work offer. Natalie kept quiet as she thought about what was said. Her mind couldn't get away from the truth in them. What she thought about Mateus, the house, and even Ethan wasn't just a job. She was still learning about this road, and now it seemed like there was more to her decision than just taking an offer. Natasha sat at her room table that night and stared at the job offer letter. There was a part of her that really wanted to accept. It wanted to start that new journey and follow her dream. She didn't want to say anything, but she couldn't help but hesitate. She went back to her book and started to write. The words came out like a flood, an effort to make sense of her crazy thoughts. Remaining here means facing doubt and something I can't explain. But going, it would be like running away to leave. I'm not sure if I'm here to change Mateus or if he's changing me. The words she wrote on the paper showed how much emotional struggle she was going through. She remembered all the little things she did with Mateus, like how he responded to her food and how his behavior changed in ways that were hard to notice. She didn't fully understand the tie, but she knew it was important. She felt something as she wrote, the fear that something important would be lost forever if she left now. It wasn't just about Mateus either. It was about who she was becoming and what she was learning about herself along the way. It wasn't just a matter of job whether to leave or stay. She had to face her own fears and limits. She finally wrote, I need more time, and sighed as she closed the book. I need to know what my heart really wants. She felt a little better when she laid down, but she knew that she wouldn't have to make the choice right then. When the time was right, she would be ready to make the right one. Mateus was determined not to let things go on the next day when he woke up. Getting in touch with his emotions and telling Natalie what was on his mind was important. Too much fear of losing her made them not pay attention. He felt like he had to be honest with himself and someone else for the first time in years. He went into the kitchen and found her making lunch. He tried to stay cool as he talked to her. She was shocked by how determined he looked when she looked up and saw him. Natalie, I need to talk to you, he said in a tense voice. She put the tools to the side and used her apron to wipe her hands. Mateus took a big breath and put his thoughts in order. He was scared she might hear his heart beating so fast. I know about the job offer you got, he said straight out. I know you're free to go follow your dreams. Before you decide, though, I need to tell you something. Natalie looked at him very carefully. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed a mix of interest and worry. Mateus paused because he could feel the wall he had built up inside himself to keep up. He pushed it down this time, though. Please don't leave. The words hung in the air, making it feel both heavy and free. This made Mateus feel better, like a stone had been taken off his chest. Natalie didn't say anything because she was still thinking about what he had said. Mateus was sure he had to go on and be more clear. Things have changed since you got here. The house, the weather, and I. He stopped and looked at the ground before turning back to face her. You gave me back something I thought was lost for good. I know I haven't said this before, but I need to. I value your presence here. Her heart was beating fast. She wasn't expecting Mateus to say this, and she wasn't expecting to see such weakness in a man who had always been so strong. Mateus, I don't know what to say, she said, her voice getting choked. You don't need to say anything right now, he cut her off by raising his hand. I need you to know. You can pick. I had to tell you the truth because I don't want someone I care about to leave for the first time. They were silent for a long time, and the quiet was full of feelings that they didn't say. Natasha tried to take it all in as Mateus moved back to give her room. She still wasn't sure what she would do, but she did know that what Mateus had just said had changed everything. Once they were done talking with Mateus, there was a different kind of silence in the house. Natalie was thinking about her choice during a tense silence that was full of expectations. It was like Mateus' words were calling to her, making her confused and more aware of how she felt at the same time. Before, the hallways didn't seem to notice her, but now they did. It was like the whole house was waiting to see what she would do next. The days that went by were full of stress. Mateus kept doing what he always did, but his eyes showed that he was trying to look relaxed. He always looked like he was waiting, as if Natalie's every move could be a reaction to what he said. Natalie, on the other hand, avoided direct contact and spent hours arranging her thoughts in the kitchen and fields. One afternoon, Natalie went for a walk to the lake at the end of the land. The calm water surface matched the clear blue sky. She sat on the edge, put her arms around her knees, and let her emotions flow. His dream for a long time had been to move to the city, work in a restaurant, and then open his own cafe. But her time in the house had turned into something much more important than she had ever thought possible. There was more to the choice than just a matter of work. She had to decide who she was going to be and what she was going to build. She thought about Mateus and how he had changed since she got there. Since she got there, he had become less cold. Not everything had changed, but it was a start, a promise that something could get better if she stayed. Natalie took a big breath and made a choice. Even though she didn't know what would happen in the future, she knew she wanted to find out more about what had started to grow in the house and between her and Mateus. She got up and felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She went back to the house, sure that she now knew the answer. Natalie went right to Mateus' office when she got into the house. She rang the doorbell and heard his voice inviting her inside. On the table, Mateus was sitting. His eyes were tired but awake, as if he had been waiting for this moment. He put down his work and leaned forward to look at her when he saw her. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice calm even though she was scared. Mateus nodded, and his heart was beating fast as he got ready to hear the words that would make everything different. She started, I've thought a lot about what you said and what I want for my future. The restaurant in town's offer is a great chance, and I thought for a long time that taking it would be the only right thing to do. Mateus's stomach turned because he knew the answer was coming soon, but he didn't say anything, so she could go on. Though, now that I'm living and working in this house, I see that my dream isn't just to open a bistro or become a famous cook. She went on, her voice now full of passion. It's also about the people around me and building something real that gives my life more meaning. Mateus felt a spark of hope inside him, but he stayed focused and waited for the end of those words. I finally chose to stay, Natalie said. Not because I want to give up my hopes, but because I think we still need to build something here. There's something between us. After a moment of silence, Mateus felt a wave of emotions that was so strong it almost made him choke. Then he finally found his voice. Does keeping mean? Do you also want to build something with me? He asked carefully because he didn't want to force her to do anything. She gave a firm nod, her eyes shining with purpose. Yes, I want to build something with you, but I also have my own dreams, and I want you to be a part of them, she said. When she saw Mateus's small smile, she felt better. Let's build this future together, he said, his eyes filled with new purpose. The mood in the house started to change more noticeably after Natalie made her choice. The windows that had been shut before were now open, letting lots of light into the rooms. In his office, Mateus used to be alone, but he started to look for more people to talk to, especially Natalie. The way he stood was still guarded, but his movements were lighter than they had been before. Mateus walked into the kitchen that morning while Natalie was making food. He looked at her for a moment, not sure how to begin what he was going to say. Natalie saw him, looked up, and smiled at him to cheer him up. "What's wrong?" she asked with a spatula in her hand. In fact, Mateus began, sniffling. "I want to know, could you show me how to cook?" Natalie blinked, shocked by the question. It's strange that Mateus, who had never been interested in cooking, now wanted to learn. She smiled because she felt love for him. A small but important step was taken. She moved away from the stove and waved for him to come closer. "Of course," she said. "Let's begin with something easy." Mateus learned that cooking was more than just a set of routine steps as they cooked together. His teacher Natalie taught him to plan each move, feel the parts, and enjoy the process. He stumbled at first and laughed uncomfortably at himself when he made mistakes, but over time he got the hang of it. Mateus had an event that changed his life. He saw how learning to cook was a lot like learning how to talk to people. He put a part of himself into something that other people would see. When they were done getting ready, he looked at Natalie and then at the dish they had made together. "This isn't just cooking, right?" he asked in a soft voice that showed he understood. "It's more than that," she told him, taking his hand. "It's about making things, sharing them, and most of all, being open to mistakes and learning from them." Mateus knew at that very moment that he was starting a new part of his life. He was letting love in, the link he had been so afraid of. He knew he would be able to keep growing as long as Natalie was with him. The house turned into a place of welcome and hope over time. All around, people could see the improvements Natalie had made. As always, Ethan took good care of the yard. It was now full of new colors, and the house was happy and full of life. Natalie and Mateus spent more time together. They didn't just hang out in the kitchen. They did things all over the house. Mateus, who had been so stiff and cut off before, started to smile more, ask questions, and pay close attention as Natalie told stories. Their meals turned into special times when they talked about silly things and shared ideas. Ethan and Mrs. Margot also saw how things had changed. The maid who had always kept a close eye on Mateus now saw him in a different way. He had become more open and friendly, ready to share his life with anyone who was there. As they walked through the yard one day, Mateus stopped in a small empty area near the lake. With a smile on his face, he looked at Natalie. "I've been thinking about your bistro," he said slowly at first, "and it might not be too far away. What if we built a small restaurant right here? You could live out your dream without having to go anywhere else." Natalie was quiet for a moment as she thought about it. It was even better than she thought it would be. Mateus didn't just agree with her dream. He wanted to be a part of it and help her build it. She hugged him tight as tears filled her eyes. "That sounds great to me," she whispered as she held him close. "But only if we build it together, one step at a time." Mateus nodded, and he felt a warm feeling growing inside him. The house, which used to stand for loneliness and isolation, turned into a place where new ideas could be made and love and hope grew. So they started to make plans. For the first time, Mateus felt ready to face anything as long as Natalie was with him. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be problems along the way. That's when the house became more than just a building. The sun was shining over the lake, and the flowers were moving in the wind. It was where they could start over and have a bright future together.